Good afternoon, everyone, and excited to be part of this panel on a topic that, as the program notes, we're all very experienced at talking about, because we're described as a deeply experienced panel on this topic. But yet the moment, I think, of thinking about impact, has really arrived right at the center of the challenges the world and this country are facing and trying to make decisions about. We're halfway through the SDG process. All that private capital that was supposed to be driving, achieving those goals, we're way behind what we would have hoped to get there. If you can bear to listen to some of the political people out there, the ESG is the new front line of communism and the destruction of all that is good and American, and maybe a big issue in the next election campaign. And I think as I look at the debate around impact and ESG, and I'm going to ask our panelists to talk about that, it seems like it's being attacked from two sides. One side is that political side that is wanting to declare this the era of woke capitalism. And the other side are people who've been activists hoping that business would play the role it should play in building an inclusive economy and multi-stakeholder partnerships, but are profoundly disappointed and see massive amounts of green and social washing out there. And so I wanted to ask each of our panelists, really, where do you think we are in terms of being able to take seriously the notion of business as a force for good, that business can do good by, or do well by doing good? And start with Dominic Barton. I mean, you've been at this a long time, as I said, and are now chairing two really interesting ends of the spectrum. One, Leapfrog, which is a real impact-driven business from the start about selling insurance to poor people, and on the other end, chairing Rio Tinto, which is finding itself as a part of the mining industry, really in the heart of some of the big debates about the future of the tech economy as much as the old economy. Dominic, where are we in this?
I think we're in the early stages, and I'm an optimist, so I'm optimistic that we'll get there. As you said, I don't think it's happened as fast as we need it to happen, but I think I'm also a hardcore capitalist, if you will, but if you go back to Adam Smith and you read his first book he wrote on the theory of moral sentiments, he talks about it's the duty of the entrepreneur to take care of the society in which they operate. It's a pretty broad, you could almost argue, socialist type of a thing to say, and I think it's right. And I think the good news is there's a lot more capital, investment capital, and actually sort of from the investors, but also from businesses that actually want to do it. As you mentioned, from a Leapfrog point of view, this is it's a $2.5 billion private equity firm that's focused on impact. I'm a coffee boy on it. The founders are the ones that have really driven it, but it's really focused on the 4.5 billion emerging consumers. The prime focus on people with less than $11.20 a day, providing healthcare, financial inclusion, and to make money, because it has to be sustainable, but it's helping people. And you're building businesses when you drive it. As you said, on the other side, for Rio Tinto, it's a mining company. A lot of people might shudder at that, but what has got me excited about the organization is the purpose, which is to provide the materials for the energy transition, for the copper. And there is just a massive amount that we need to be able to get to 1.5 degrees. So companies can play a role. And as you said, I think there's a lot of challenges. I've been shocked at it being woke and so forth, when actually this is, I think, the driver of what's going to shift us. So early days, but I think there's a lot of momentum.
Yeah, you're not the first face I think of when I think of woke, I have to say. But Ramiro, what are all these years working as a leader in the Hispanic community around business and development? What to you does business doing well by doing good mean?
Well, it means economic development, and I want to touch on something that was mentioned about free enterprise. The free enterprise system, while not perfect, it is a creation by people who came to this country from other places to create the largest and best economy in the world by far. And competition is good. Free enterprise will help find solutions through that competition, but a rising tide will lift all boats. There's no question that we represent the 5th largest economy in the world. Hispanic Americans number 63.5 million people, but if we were our own economy, much smaller than India, which is 1.3 billion people, but these 63.5 million would be the 5th largest economy, larger than Great Britain and other nations at close to $3 trillion. So I see this whole waste of time in discussing who's woke, who's corporate social responsibility, who's ESG. It's really a lot of noise. What's happening are the urban core centers across America that are being revived by LGBTQ businesses, Black, Asian, women-owned, Hispanic-owned businesses, African-American-owned businesses that are bringing new life to an economy that was created because of social justice, economic freedom, and it started more than 300 years ago with initial capital being provided by the Spanish government.
So Neera, Tana, you're special advisor to the president and really have worked a lot on aspects of this administration's approach to business, and you're betting big on business as a force to good.
Well,
what does that really mean? It's not necessarily what one would have expected.
Well, I think there are many components to it, but a central component to our approach is ensuring that there is a deep partnership. But for example, one of the president's, one of the pieces of legislation the president is most proud of is the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act is particularly focused on meeting our climate goals. It is an aggressive strategy to meet our climate goals, but it operates through subsidies, essentially tax credits. Now, the good news is that we expect those tax credits to really be taken up beyond expectation, which means we will reach our climate goals. But those tax credits operate really in a partnership. They operate as a partnership with business, with other stakeholders to ensure that we are meeting our climate goals. So, I think this is a good example of a well-functioning system where there's incentives by the government to ensure that businesses are doing the right thing, but always doing the right thing, but also doing the right thing for their bottom line. I think this whole conversation about ESG and attacks on ESG are really, hypocritical and odd, because ESG is really about ensuring that financial advisors, market actors have the full range of information about what will affect the bottom line, not just in the moment, but over the long term. And we really see this debate about these attacks on ESG as a kind of, unnecessary polarization, hyper-partisanship. And we hope that that we can, continue to make progress by ensuring that the government is driving the right incentives, but companies are there to really meet the need.
I mean, the president just vetoed Republican legislation that was a part of this woke capitalism effort, I think. And I mean, I know you would like to depoliticize it, but do you expect it to be a big feature of the election campaign?
Yeah, so I'll just say, the president issued his first veto against, he issued his first veto against Republican legislation that essentially would make it impossible or make it very difficult for market actors to take into account ESG. And he did that because he thought that actually hurt the economy, that it would actually it would really hurt people in making the right investments they want to make. It was actually an interference in the market, which is really ironic, from our perspective, to see that pass the Republican House. So I think the president feels on very strong ground that the country really does want to see us meet important national goals, like addressing climate, in a way that actually encourages a strong, stable market economy.
So Dominic, I mean, the the critique from those that have been in the impact movement that a lot of the ESG work is, certainly some of these funds are using the label of ESG, but there's not really a lot of substance to it. I mean, what can be, is that a fair criticism, and what would you like to see them do to go really make ESG really more meaningful and substantial?
I mean, I do think we have to have measures for it. I mean, it's a classic thing. We need the measures, but I actually think they're very consistent. It's exactly what you said. I actually think being anti-ESG is actually anti-business. And the reason is, if I just put my Rio Tinto hat on, we're a 20 to 30 year time frame company, what we look at. There is going to be, whether your head is in the ground or not, some sort of a carbon cost or tax. We have to take that into account. So for our shareholders, who are typically long-term shareholders, we have to take that into account. We have to shift to renewables. We have to think about our own carbon footprint. It's in our shareholders' interest, and so blocking that is actually damaging shareholders. But I think what we need to do is be much more clear about that. Why? Okay, show us why that's the case. And I think the danger is when it's easy to put a label on something and then not have any measures. And if I flick it to the leapfrog side, I think there has to be measures, and these measures should be audited. One of the things I think we need to move quickly on is, how do you get assurance on your ESG targets and what you say? And I think it's in the interest. The people who should drive that the hardest are actually long-term investors, because it's in their interest. So the pension funds, and you see that with the Canadian pension funds, you see that with the Singaporean, people who really are out there for 20 to 30 years. And I think we need these measures. And then we need the movement of their capital out if people are not living up to what those things are. But I think one of the things we have to be really clear on is exactly what you're saying. ESG is completely in the business interest. It is not an add-on, it's core. And so companies are going to have metrics on that, and it would be great to have those assured, just like our financial statements are.
Now, Ramiro, the COVID pandemic, and also at the same time here, some of the killings of African Americans by the police sort of really led business to make a whole load of promises about changing the way it operated in order to address how many marginalized communities are out there that seem to be not part of an inclusive economy, but part of one that is becoming ever left behind.
Right.
Obviously, at 63 million, Hispanics cannot all be in that, they're a big minority. But right. I mean, what are you seeing? Has business followed through on that? What would you like to say?
Well, I think it's a mixed report. To answer your question, most folks that think of a Hispanic American, we self-identify to be Hispanic American, but we're not a race. We're an ethnicity. We're a culture that's Caucasian, Asian, Afro-Latino, LGBTQ, Native American. But all of us are connected through our love for the economy and this nation. And Spanish was the first language spoken here after native languages. That almighty dollar sign came from the Spanish peseta, the American symbol for the monetary system. So although I was born and raised in Texas, we were all raised to be equal to others, not better, just equal. So when we go out and we work with our 5 million Latino-owned businesses, they're in love with the CHIPS Act. They're in love with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. They're global thinkers. Their mindset is something that is very American, but it could be better. And ESG, I was just telling you earlier, it's very critical, but it's really corporate social responsibility with measures and specific information. Mark Twain had this saying that if a vision without a plan is a hallucination, and we need to have specific measures to succeed. You need a marker to measure against. And although we're a nonpartisan pro-business organization based in Washington, D.C., we have 260 Latino chambers from Hawaii to Puerto Rico, Seattle, everywhere, and fast growing. But we're nonpartisan because we only care about policy that helps the economy and allows us to continue to be innovative and to keep growing jobs where they're needed. We love to say we're not blue or red. we're red, white, and blue, but our favorite color is green, the color of money.
And Neera, I'm interested. I'm currently writing a book on the sort of future. How do we get an economic system that really works for people and planet? And when I started it 2 years ago, that seemed relatively simple. But then we've had geopolitical upheaval, and obviously the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and Chinese American divorce accelerating, and so it becomes more and more difficult to figure out how that alters the notion of impact and good and what we expect of business. How much do you think it changed this whole notion of friendshoring, all sorts of things, the competition in Africa between China and America for influence? I mean, does the word good and impact help in that conversation?
Well, I mean, I think the president has said many times that though we are in a competition with China, there are shared goals around climate, for example. The vice president was just in Africa, and she really wanted to make clear that it was important for us as a country, for the United States, to invest in Africa and to deploy resources in Africa sort of outside of the context of the U.S.-China competition, because I think people see that as exclusively part of our goals there. So obviously the world has become a much more complicated place, but even in that complication, there are important global goods that we need to address and global challenges we need to address. So again, when the president met with President Xi, he spent a lot of time talking about climate issues because we can have those priorities. But I would say, a point I'd like to make that builds on the conversation we just had is, I think it's important to recognize that there's a lot of polarization around some issues related to business and politics, but there is a greater consensus. And the president is proud of the bipartisan legislation he has passed around the CHIPS Act, Infrastructure Act, IRA was not bipartisan, but it did pass. And in each of those pieces of legislation, there is at the heart a notion that the government is trying to drive greater economic growth more equitably, more focused on communities left behind, more focused on rural communities, urban communities, ensuring that workers who don't have a college degree are employed, are at the heart of it. And in each of those areas, that there is a strong role for government investment, but business to play a critical role in answering that need.
Great. We're almost out of time, so I just want to ask you each for a one-sentence answer, which is there one thing that in the next year you would like to see business do more of that you think would be good for the planet?
I think it's providing more examples of what you described. These are all, they're benefiting everyone. So let's show the real examples of how capital going in to help people that are in need of it, whether they don't have the resources that we would think you could make money in doing it, demonstrate those. These are 20 companies that have actually worked and are helping this particular group, and this is how it works. And focus on how the real impact that we're having, even on the decoupling. I mean, I think there's a lot of rhetoric, but there is an immense amount of trade that's going on in spite of all the rhetoric. And I think we should focus on that and how we rely on each other. Otherwise, the rhetoric takes over the reality.
That was a great one sentence.
Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah. Just very quick. I know that after COVID, three things. One is we all realize we're more interconnected to one another than we ever thought before. Two, what I experienced are tremendous acts of kindness that each of us, though we may be different people, I think we're more united than people think we are in America. Tremendous acts of kindness to one another. The third is I'm a big believer that we won't go into a recession, and we need to make our own future economy because it's different than the one in the past, and we need to be bold and bullish.
The last word to you, Neera, on that.
Invest more in renewables.
Wow.
That was one sentence.